He was the kind of dog that in the right hands and with the right set of circumstances could have been the most perfect, delicious family pet known to man, but that just didn't work out for Sid. This is the Canine Justice Chronicles, the podcast which gives big love to our big breeds. I'm your host, Ruth Holroyd.
And I'm also your host, Peter O'Brien.
And this episode focuses on Sidney, who was a gorgeous, yummy XL bully.
He was a big boy as well, though, wasn't he?
Oh, yes, he was.
He was very strong. Lovely, super excitable. Most dogs at the rescue were like this when they came out of their kennel because it's such a stressful environment, but he was such a bundle of nervous energy and so aroused and super strong. He'd pull you all over the place, wouldn't he?
He would, given the chance, he would. He came to us because he'd been found as a stray, so he was wandering about in the general public. So he was picked up by the dog warden, who managed to locate his owners, and it very quickly materialised that he had been deliberately dumped and they didn't want him back. So he ended up with us at the rescue, and we worked with Sidney quite extensively because he was sort of our prime candidate for why we were there at the rescue. He was nervous, he was reactive, he was very, very, very stressed out in his kennel, and he was a dog who needed a lot of input, a lot of positive work to become more adoptable and thrive, really, and sort of manage those big emotions that he was having. He was also one of the most loving dogs that we had the pleasure of working with. I mean, he was a big boy, as you said, but he absolutely thought that he was a lap dog. I've got videos of him sort of squashing me, asking for snuggles.
Yeah, well, that's it. He did settle very quickly. I say very quickly. It took him a few minutes and you had to be away from all the noise of the kennel. You take him into the fields and he'd become a completely different dog, which is the case for a lot of dogs there. It's just the way that Sidney looked and how strong he actually was. Like, if he wanted to go somewhere, you were going pretty much. Hence why you needed more experienced handlers to take him out. But lovely dog once we got him out, full of personality. And I think it is worth mentioning as well that we met him and spent a lot of time with him before this XL bully ban came into play.
We worked with him for months, didn't we, before the ban came in. So we had the pleasure of seeing what Sidney was really like and what his true personality was like, because we had the privilege of being able to take him out of that super duper high stress kennel environment and giving him the space to decompress and relax. We worked with lots of sort of ambiguous bull breeds who, yes, they could have been typed. No, you might have got away with it. There was no question. Sidney was an XL bully. He met every single criteria for the ban. And as a result, you know, he's a big dog, really powerful dog, very muscular dog.
Everyone I'm sure that's listening has an image in their head of the standard XL bully that 9 out of 10 of you probably have Sidney's face in your head right now. At that stage, even though he was in rescue, there was still lots and lots of hope for him that he'd find his forever home. We were all super positive and super hopeful that it just had to be the right person that came along. But then, unfortunately, with the media portraying the dog the way that they did, and they came to a very quick decision, in my opinion, of course, that they were going to ban the breed, all hope, or any hope, really, that Sidney had of been adopted. Not that we ever completely gave up on him, but it quickly dissipated to what the heck are we going to do here?
He was the kind of dog that in the right hands and with the right set of circumstances could have been the most perfect, delicious family pet known to man, but that just didn't work out for Sid. There was already rumblings of a ban before the ban was actually announced, and with the stigma that was attached to bull breeds and obviously most recently the XL bully, it made finding him a home very, very challenging. And this sort of demonisation of bull breeds in the media is not new. This has been going on for years and years and years. We sort of see these trends with the media of certain dog breeds being completely ripped apart and being categorised as these devil dogs, these child-killing beasts, when actually, when given the right enrichment, the right guidance, the right training, the right support, that's so not the case. I had the pleasure of speaking with Professor Claire Parkinson from Edge Hill University. She's also the co-founder of the Centre for Animal-Human Studies, and she talked a little bit about the history of breed-specific legislation and why it came about, and also the impact that the media representation of these dogs has had.
My name is Professor Claire Parkinson, and my job title is Associate Head of Department and Co-Director of the Centre for Human Animal Studies at Edge Hill University. Obviously, you have to go back to the late 1980s, early 1990s, and there were a range of different things happening at that time. There were governmental concerns about the rise of drug culture, about the influence of American culture on the UK, concerns about the rise of violent crime, concerns about unemployment, and linking that to youth crime, which was committed particularly by young working class men at the time. And in the mix of that, what emerged from this was a strong association between certain breeds of dog, particularly pit bull terriers, dog fighting, and drug culture. And so there was a lot of concern that was sort of revolving at the time around dog bites. But you have to remember as well that the media coverage was creating what we call a moral panic at the time. And that moral panic was around certain breeds and the owners of certain breeds. Particularly pit bulls were targeted. Now, irrespective of the fact that at the time the government did know, they had information that said that there were more dog bites that were attributed to German Shepherd dogs than to any other breed at the time. Now, I just have to be clear, though, that nobody was actually collating dog bite statistics at that time and dog bite and breed statistics, and they still don't. There's no reliable source. However, they had information that that was the case at the time. But the then Home Secretary that introduced breed-specific legislation said that he couldn't afford to offend the middle classes, and it's the middle classes that had breeds like German Shepherds and even Rottweilers, Dobermans, and so on. So the pit bull, which was not a breed recognised by the UK Kennel Club, became almost the sort of the poster child for the dog bite problem. And then the press coverage of pit bulls and what were essentially stereotypes of the owners of pit bulls, those appeared in the newspapers, particularly the popular press, or what we call the tabloid press. And as a result, the public perception of dangerous dogs really was shaped by those media representations very, very strongly, and also those associations that were made with certain areas of working class culture. The way in which the government responded was to try and stem this public outcry because they perceived that there were an increase in dog bites at that time. And so it was easy to target the pit bull. And so we end up with breed-specific legislation that then has to rely on a set of quite vague criteria which are reliant on certain measurements. So, for example, defining a pit bull is quite difficult because a pit bull is not a recognized breed, so it doesn't have a recognized set of criteria. So there's kind of a whole host of sort of vague criteria that were drawn from a 1977 article from the Pit Bull Gazette that were used and still are used today to define what a pit bull is. And it's just a series of measurements. So essentially what we get is a piece of legislation that is wholly reliant on how a dog looks rather than what a dog actually does to basically find it at the time, find it guilty of being a dangerous dog or a fighting dog, as people were referring to them at the time. So what we've ended up with is a piece of legislation that is completely useless. It doesn't do what it intends to do. And of course, we have the proof of that because year on year, we have an increase in the number of dog bite statistics and dog bite fatalities.
Ties into kind of what you were saying about Sid's situation that he found himself in, and the words you used where he could have been that perfect companion to the right person who had the time and that background knowledge and done the research. But you could say that about any dog, whether they're in rescue or whether they're a puppy. That goes for any dog, not just big, well, now banned breeds. It does the same with any dog. It's just the fact that he is a bully and that there's this big stigma about big dogs and bull breeds in general.
But also as well, Sidney had been let down by his first owners. I mean, he was dumped,
absolutely.
For goodness sake. He couldn't have been any more let down if they'd tried, frankly. And so he'd not had those foundations laid for him for success. And so we were picking up the pieces on the back end of that to try and create a more well-rounded, balanced dog. So whoever was going to take him on full time and adopt him would have had quite a significant commitment to make to training and to boundaries, which a lot of people weren't prepared to do. And I think you have to be a certain type of person to be a responsible bully owner. They're not a dog for your average person. They are strong-willed, highly motivated, highly driven, and they need someone with the correct type of communication to work with them.
True. But again, I think you could say that for a lot of dog breeds. And as Claire rightly said, there was a lot of attention from the general public suggesting that there were more dog attacks. And then the media quickly latched on to this American XL Bully breed. I mean, the name doesn't really help them. It was a very easy thing for them to latch on to, I suppose. It doesn't necessarily mean that they were committing the most dog attacks. The media picked this up and ran with it, and it completely changed general public's perception on them, which is super unfortunate. But they were successful in what they wanted to give out in terms of a propaganda almost against this breed, and it ultimately worked.
I think we've got a big hill to climb because we need the public to understand that breed and propensity towards aggression, that there's no reliable evidence that these two things are linked. And in fact, there's many other things that we need to think about. We really need to be able to get a message out there or get a narrative out there that breed-specific legislation doesn't work, but the reason why it doesn't work. So we need to break this narrative around the link between breed and propensity for aggression. I think it's worth saying for owners and the dogs, the implications are huge. There's many, many cases of people who have bought a puppy and they have no idea when this puppy grows up that it fits the measurements of, say, a pit bull, for example. This means that your canine companion can be taken away from you by the police, held in kennels, sometimes for months, often for huge periods of time, sometimes more than a year. You won't be able to see your dog. You don't know what's happening with your dog. You might have to go through a lengthy and expensive court case to get your dog back. It's horrendous for owners and for the welfare of dogs. When you get to, if you like, the economics of breed-specific legislation, since the XL bully ban, the costs for police, I think, went from about 4 million in 2018 to over 11 million in 2024. The numbers that I saw, they were expecting it to be costing the police around 25 million by this year to enforce the XL bully ban. And I'm fairly sure there's better ways that that money could be spent than on a piece of ineffective legislation. Because we're not tackling the issues that are leading to dog bites, the costs for the NHS are absolutely enormous. We're talking about 25,000 or so dog bites or dog strikes needing some form of hospital attention per year. The costs across the board of the failures of BSL are absolutely huge. Absolutely at the root of this is an ineffective piece of legislation.
I think Sidney's experience could have been vastly different if the media hadn't so successfully demonised bull breeds of all types in the way that they did and created this moral panic, to use Claire's term, of complete distrust of these breeds. As far as the narrative that's being pushed out by the media is concerned, these dogs can live happily alongside you for years in your family home and then turn around and maul your child one day without any warning at all. That's just not how dogs work. Categorically, that is not how dogs work. And I think that is proof from the 2021 study that she did, where she interviewed the general public to gauge their perception on dog body language and dog communication, and actually how so many people are aware of certain situations that can trigger dogs to bite, but then they couldn't possibly happen to their dog. Their dog doesn't behave like that. And we need to move away from this nonsensical notion that certain breeds are more likely to attack than others. That's just not how it works.
His granddad turned and said to us, I know he's friendly, I know he's beautiful, I love him, he's gentle, but the media's made me scared of him. So even though he's seen him every week, he knows full well he's not going to do anything. He said that, but all of the stories on the news have almost changed his perception because that's all he sees every day.
I wanted to speak to an exempt XL bully owner to get their perspective on the ban and explore their experience as an owner of this breed and talk to them a little bit about the impact that this ban has had on them and their lives and their relationship with their dog. So I had the absolute pleasure of meeting Ruby and her gorgeous blue XL bully, Cumber, and we booked a private dog walking field so Cumber could be off lead, unmuzzled, live his best life and be as relaxed as possible for this interview.
I'm Ruby and my dog is Cumber. He's about 2.5 now and we got him as a puppy. We hadn't heard of the breed before at all, so we looked into the history, the dogs that were bred into it, what it was bred for, which is now debatable. We also watched those training videos. We wanted to make sure that he would fit into our lives. In 2022, when we were looking, every article about them was nice. They were bred for companionship, whereas now they're bred for fighting and killing. Because of the way Cumber is, he just takes everything in his stride. The implications have mainly been for us. It was quite a lot financially all in one go. We had a lot of anxiety around it because we weren't sure if they were going to turn around and say, right, all these dogs now have to be put to sleep or something. I had to register him as a dangerous dog. And I just remember paying for that pleasure and crying because I'm like, he's never done anything wrong. And now I have labelled him officially as a dangerous dog and he's not. I just felt so guilty. It just doesn't make sense to me. It really upsets me because he's just so innocent. The worst thing is not knowing if someone's just going to turn around and report him one day for doing nothing, because it is literally guilty until proven innocent. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, they don't even get proven innocent before they're put to sleep. I just feel a lot of pressure for him to constantly be perfect. I panic about him interacting with other people, whereas I didn't so much before. I would always have him on a lead and I'd pull it in if another dog came past, but I'd have no worries about him going to play with it. Whereas now I feel like I'm sorry, he's really friendly. He just wants to play. And constantly panicking and apologising for him because I don't want the other dog owners to panic. If they did turn around and be like, that's threatening behaviour or he's out of control, then he'd probably be seized and we're not sure if we'd even get him back after. I think it's knowing your dog and being able to control them in situations that might trigger them, not letting them go into situations where that might happen. You can have a reactive dog. You can still be a responsible owner. Same way you can have a really, really friendly dog that's not going to do anything and be an irresponsible owner. It's just not letting your dog put itself or other dogs in a position where they might react. Even yourself as a person, you don't want to put another dog in a position where they might react to you, and because that's only going to have consequences for them.
What Ruby was talking about there about not allowing your dog in a situation where they may make a mistake or they may be reactive to a trigger, that is something that certainly we as dog owners are hugely passionate about. When you have such powerful breeds, it is so serious. One mistake and your dog pays with their life. It's not the same with the likes of the smaller breeds, because as dreadful it is to say out loud, if a smaller breed were to attack a human or another animal, they're not going to cause the same damage as these powerful working breeds, which are much larger and have a much larger bite force. So it is even more important that we as their owners and their guardians understand the legal responsibility that we have as owners to ensure that they're safe, and that we're doing everything we can to ensure that we've got a well-balanced dog and that we don't put them in situations which could potentially be enormously detrimental to them.
If you listen to the first episode that we put out, we've got 2 baubles back home. And that's something that I've lived by since living with them from a puppy to where they are now, is not putting them in situations where they can mess up. If that happens, then I've failed them as an owner. It's not the dogs that have failed, it's me for putting them in that situation. But unfortunately, not all dog owners think in that way.
Our society at the moment and the way our canine culture is in this country is people need to take more responsibility with their dog-to-dog interactions. It's important to mention as well that the absolute priority in this situation needs to be the maintenance of public safety. Along with that comes the safety of our dogs too. There are plenty of irresponsible dog owners in this country at the moment, of all breeds, may I add. And we can't ignore the fact that powerful working breeds, large breeds, can inflict more damage than the likes of the smaller breeds, which is why it is even more important that owners of these types of dogs are very aware of the legal precautions that they must take to keep not only themselves safe, but their dogs safe, and other dogs too, so that everybody can share space happily and safely. We can relax a little bit more. There is less stress being communicated with the dog as well.
For me, one of the most important things is if people just understood the absolute basics of dog body language and they learned how to communicate properly with their dogs. I think that would go a long way to alleviating a lot of problems later on down the line. I keep saying, can people please listen to their dogs? They're speaking to us, they're communicating with us all the time and telling us, what they need and what they want and how they feel. But unfortunately, we did a study that backed this up, where people were very, very confident that they understood dog body language. But actually, when we gave them examples, bar the really obvious ones, which were a play bow and teeth baring, other than that, they really struggled to identify what dogs were trying to communicate through their body language. So yeah, that's got to be one of the top things for me. Learn what your dog is saying.
I definitely think that there are not necessarily bad owners, but there's a lot more irresponsible owners than there are ones that will keep their dogs on lead, make sure, is it okay if my dog says hello? Can my child say hello? We've had a lot of times children just coming up to Kumba and stroking him without asking, which is absolutely fine, but they don't know that. If we are responsible owners in no matter what breed we have, that will cut down attacks massively. I think the media like to run with the stories because they're XL bullies. It's a very scary sounding name. I think that also, even though they were becoming popular before that, I think the negative attention made them more appealing to people who wanted a dog for the wrong reasons, probably to breeders too. So again, there's another influx of them. And as soon as these not great owners have got a hold of them, that's what's leading to more attacks, giving the media more stories to run with. I think the worst has actually already happened. There's already been dogs abandoned. There's already been ones put to sleep. We've already had to register them. They can't really do anything worse. They're already moving on to another breed. And if they do try and do that, I think it's only going to open a discussion again of should we just overturn BSL completely. It's impacted our lives for so long for something from the start we've been advocating for it. So I feel like there's quite a lot of pressure on XL owners to now constantly have a well-behaved dog. Like I'm constantly apologising for Kumba. Obviously his tongue in your mouth's not nice. I do actually apologise for that. But when people come over, if he goes to even sniff a hand, I'm like, oh, sorry, because I don't want them to panic, or I want people to know he's not going to do anything. But if that was any other breed of dog, they'd probably just let their dog run up to another, whether that's right or wrong, they would just let them run off and do it without a care in the world. It would be nice not to feel so much pressure.
It has to be a sort of multi-pronged approach. So the first thing is mandatory licensing for all breeders. I think it would need to be tiered. You treat commercial breeders slightly differently to hobby breeders. We need centralised licensing. We need a national database. I'm very strongly in favour of prohibiting online and social media puppy sales. I think we should have compulsory health and genetic testing and mandatory health screening for all dogs that are going to be used for breeding. We need limits as well on age and the number of litters. I think we should have compulsory training for anybody who wants to breed dogs. We absolutely need a national dog breeding registry. We absolutely need to enforce microchipping at the moment so that there is an absolute link between dog and human. We need much better education of the public. I am actually in favour of licensing in the same way that you have to do a theory test to get your driving licence. I actually believe that you should have to pass a test to get a licence to own a dog in the first place. We've absolutely got to move away from this ridiculous focus on breed and typing and what a dog looks like. We need to think about the dog as an individual and, look at what that dog does. I think until we make some really huge changes in these directions, we're not going to see big changes in terms of public protection, number of dog bites reducing, and we need to ensure that responsible ownership starts at that very beginning. I don't see why we shouldn't afford the same kinds of level of responsibility to dog ownership, a living, breathing, sentient being. We're just treating them at the moment as just throwaway objects. I would love to say in my optimistic moments that it's going to be overturned. I would love to say that at some point government is going to listen to the evidence of all the academic studies and all the welfare organisations and not be driven by media and the moral panic that they produce. I would love to say that. Unfortunately, I don't think it's the case. And I've been involved in campaigning against breed-specific legislation since before 1991, when it was first introduced, when they were talking about bringing it in. And I've been hopeful so many times. So forgive me if I don't sound too hopeful at the moment. I think the problem that any government has to face now is that if they try to do something different, as soon as the next dreadful dog bite happens or the next fatality happens, there's going to be this huge public pressure against them. Well, you got rid of breed-specific legislation and, you've told us all this time that that was the only thing that was protecting us, because, of course, that's what we've been told by the government all the way along the line, that this is what's protecting the public. I think it's going to be a very brave government that actually does anything about breed-specific legislation. I think the only thing that could potentially happen is that we have regulation that sits alongside breed-specific legislation, and there's an eventual shift.
I think Ruby is a phenomenal example of really advocating your dog and your dog's needs, particularly being a banned breed and the weight that carries on her shoulder every time she leaves the house with that dog. But how well she promotes Cumber using her social media platform and holding her head up high and proud, really proud to have that companionship with him and that trust and that, we're in this together type mentality with this. I think that's fantastic and a real great example of how the breed can be successful in light of the ban that came into place. In saying that, there is a big flip side to the, how owners have perceived the ban. Even before the ban, the breed itself, quite disposable designer dog. That's a situation Sidney unfortunately found himself in. And I really wish that we could sit here and say that, it was the story that you all wanted to hear. He kind of overcame all of his adversities. We put in all this work and it was great and it all worked out and we had that happy ending. But unfortunately, it wasn't to be.
The ban was announced in September of 2023 to come into legal fruition on the 1st of January in 2024. And the rescue made a decision that in roughly October of 2023, so really not very long after the ban was announced, that they were going to euthanize Sidney and not give him the chance to find his forever home and his place to thrive. And that is how serious this is. Dogs are dying because of people's irresponsible ownership. He was a very special dog. He was a dog that we worked with for months and had a real connection with and an attachment to. And he was not coping with kennel life. The poor lad had actually chewed the end of his tail off because he was so stressed in the kennel because of the noise. He couldn't get away from the noise. And when you're dog reactive and you are constantly surrounded from all angles by barking and howling and growling, I can't imagine how scary that is for him. And he was never really given a chance. And it fills me with such sadness that that's the state that we're in at the moment. We're at a critical point here. We are at a crisis point. And we need to wake up. We need to wake up and we need to change. And we need to take responsibility. I think the one point that we take from this and from Sidney's story is please, 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 please do your research. Understand what you're signing yourself up for. Understand what your dog needs on a genetic level and what you're going to do to fulfill that. Advocate for your dog 100% of the time. Nobody knows your dog better than you. You need to have very, very clear communication with your dog. You need to have a sound, basic understanding of dog body language so that you do not allow your dog to put themselves into a situation where they may be at risk. We need to educate ourselves. We need to move away from this ineffective piece of legislation which relies strictly on typing. We need to assess dogs on an individual basis. As several people have mentioned throughout this series, we need to look at bringing back licensing and having some sort of pragmatic approach to public safety and responsible dog ownership. But I think what this all boils down to is education and research. Please, 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 let Sidney's story be a warning of what can happen when things go so horribly wrong. Having a dog is a privilege, and it's something that people take for granted a lot of the time. These are living, sentient beings, and we need to do right by them. This is the Canine Justice Chronicles. I'm Ruth Holroyd.
And I'm Peter O'Brien.
Thank you very much to Professor Claire Parkinson from Edge Hill University and also from the Centre of Human Animal Studies. And also thank you so much to Ruby and Cumber. You can find them at Cumber_XLBully on Instagram and TikTok, and that's Cumber spelled Kumba. Responsible dog ownership starts with you, because small changes in our mindset lead to big changes in their world. Let's be the owners that our dogs deserve.